Water. It is life's most basic need. With no water, the world would become brownish dots instead of green and blue. Climate would be an endless flesh-melting hot kind. Without water, we could die. There's a water crisis in our world right now. Nearly 1 billion people live without clean drinking water. It is happening all over the world, especially in developing areas. Water changes everything, and human changes water with its negligence and desires. Let's act before it's too late. I am Mariela Joy Semanesco, and this is Project INVASIVE.
The water biogeochemical cycle, also known as the hydrological cycle, is a process that shows how water is consumed by living organisms, shifts into different phases of matter, and how it is recycled back in the atmosphere. It is basically the movement of water in the atmosphere going down to the Earth's surface. It also takes part in maintaining the weather and temperature in our planet. Through the water cycle, living organisms survive and receive the nutrients they need. Without it, the whole ecosystem would struggle because water affects all biological processes on Earth.
The water cycle revolves around three essential processes: the evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. It starts in evaporation. It is the process where the liquid is changed into a gas. The liquid in the ocean, lakes, and rivers evaporates through the sun's heat. As the sun interacts with fluid, it becomes an invisible gas known as water vapor. In plants, a process called transpiration also happens, which it loses water vapor to cool down its structure through hot weather. After evaporation, the process of condensation then happens where the water vapor turns into liquid. This process can occur either high in the atmosphere or at the lower level. The water vapor condenses around tiny particles called cloud condensation nuclei, or also known as CCN. Condensation at the ground level is called fog or mist. Like evaporation, condensation is also caused by the sun as well as the air pressure. And lastly, the precipitation. Precipitation happens when any liquid falls to Earth due to condensation in the atmosphere. This includes rain, snow, and hail.
From an anthropogenic perspective, we human beings, through our actions and what we build that we may think are beneficial, becomes the sources of stress that disrupt the balanced state of the water cycle. Every time irrigation systems are built and expanded into hundreds of acres, they withdraw 70% of fresh water worldwide, and about 90% of which is for industrial and residential uses. But once the water eventually returns to the aquifer, only about one-half of it is reusable. Similar to the construction of dams, although built but once the water essential functions, they release tons of greenhouse gases, destroy habitats, and increase sea levels and wastewater, and deprive ecosystems of nutrients. It would seem that dams save water by storing it, but their large surface areas expose more water to the sun, speeding up the evaporation process. A study shows that 170 cubic kilometers of water evaporate yearly in these types of reservoirs. That amount accounts for 7% of all fresh water consumed by human activities. Henry Louis Le Chatelier's principle states that systems that are in a state of equilibrium respond to stress, increasing their sources to restore that balance. This is why we need to be informed, responsible, and be held accountable for our disruptive actions.
Humans directly impact the water cycle by building dams for water storage and withdrawing water for industrial, agricultural, or domestic needs. Water consumption and supply are predicted to be further impacted by climate change. We frequently imagine the water cycle to be a wholly natural process in which snow and rain fall into rivers, which then flow into the ocean, where evaporation initiates the cycle once more. However, that cycle is actually being significantly interfered with by people. Additionally, a large number of studies have demonstrated that humans are primarily to blame for the seasonal variations in surface water storage on Earth. According to the study, human managed reservoirs experience a 0.86 meter seasonal variation, whereas natural lakes and ponds experience an average seasonal variation of 0.22 meters. When the differences between reservoirs and natural lakes are added up, reservoirs account for 57% of variation. However, in certain areas, human influence was even greater. For instance, the variability that may be attributable to human influence rises to 90% and more in arid regions like the Middle East, the America West, India, and Southern Africa. Humans have seized over 60% of the variability in the volume changes in freshwater bodies around the world, including all the floods, drought, and snowfall that drive lake levels up and down. That has a significant impact on the water cycle.
Invasive species are organisms that, whether big or small, could cause multiple devastating effects on our wildlife and economy. An invasive species is a new and aggressive organism that is newly introduced into an ecosystem, mainly through human ship activities such as ballast water. Since the organism is new to the ecosystem, it is able to breed and reproduce quickly due to the fact that it does not have any natural predators. The more it reproduces, the easier it is able to take over an ecosystem. Now, this situation could lead to two types of effects or threats, indirect or direct. The direct threats of invasive species, according to the National Wildlife Federation, are preying on native species, outcompeting native species for food or other resources, causing or carrying disease, and preventing native species from reproducing or killing a native species young. While its indirect threats are changing the food web in an ecosystem by destroying or replacing native food sources, which provides little to no food value for wildlife, altering the abundance or diversity of species that are important habitats for native wildlife, and changing the conditions in an ecosystem such as soil chemistry or the intensity of wildfires. All of those effects are experienced by roughly 42% of the world's species, and are also threatening human resources, causing huge economical impacts.
Epigenetics. Genetics is your genes, and gene has a unique sequence to make a protein that does something in your body. A genetic mutation is a change in one or more parts of this sequence. This couldn't just make you you, or it could contribute to a genetic disease. Epigenetic change also change a gene's DNA but not at the sequence level. Instead, special marks are added or removed that might change how a protein works in the body.
Following up on John's statement, I would like to say in more simpler words on what epigenetics is. It is what our cells adapt to according to the environment it is given. Okay, let's say for example in foods, the cells of foods are the same as what it's coming from, the same meat and the same organism, like let's say a cow. But if it is exposed to different spices or different treatments of the meat, like when they beat the meat or when they feed the cow alcohol or stuff like that, and the taste differs. The best example of epigenetics is on twins. Since twins have the exact same genetic coding, it is easier to say that they are going to be the exact same, but the way they are raised is different, which is what epigenetics is. Let's say that each twin is raised different, where one is an academic and is raised to live a good life and good future, while the other twin was raised on alcohol and drugs and different bad influences. In the end, these two twins will be very different in terms of genetics because of the different cells they were exposed to, which resulted in a different cellular programming.